So we went through really the three parts of the self-commander. One part being self-awareness. Sometimes just being aware that you're having a limbic reaction is
Right.
enough to quiet it down. So you need the pause first, obviously, but the self-awareness and pause. The second is positive self-check, or things that you can say to yourself or things that you might be able to say to another person. That might be enough. And sometimes you need to do something, a breath work or some type of mindfulness activity in order that's long enough to be able to quiet your limbic mind so that you then can be resourceful and resilient.
Welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm dedicated to helping you take control of your life. Together, we'll explore practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Making small changes is possible and can lead to big results. Are you ready? Let's go do this. Well, welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm so excited for today's guest. I'd like to welcome Mitch Weisburgh to the podcast. He's an entrepreneur, educator, and advocate for innovation in learning and all things that I have a passion for and a background in. He's author of a great book called Mind Shifting: Stop Your Brain from Sabotaging Your Happiness and Success. But don't we all want that too, right? And helping educators and students develop skills like critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration. And I have to add in there, I read the book or reading, I'm in the process of reading the book. It's not just for educators and students, although Mitch has a passion for educators and students. So I don't want to discourage anybody from shying away from the book because there's a ton of great things in there for everybody. Mitch, I gave the 3,000-foot overview. I would love if you would fill us in with some more on your background and what brought you to write the book on mind shifting. So welcome.
Okay. Well, thanks, Tim. And in terms of background, so I'm a baby boomer, so I could go back and talk about background forever, right? But I'm going to start in, I guess, for 2000, let's say 2001, where I designed a learning management system that was optimized for test prep because I knew somebody who had who had been working with high school kids and said high school kids want to prepare for the SATs online. This is back in 2001,
Yeah.
and he said there's nothing online, and let's build a company around that. So I designed the learning management system. I designed the SAT prep course that ran on top of it. And in the process of raising money after the system was up and operating and some kids were using it, one of the venture capital people that we talked to said, Mitch, what you designed is really interesting. It's really the way people learn.
Mm.
But your partner, who's supposed to be the sales and marketing guru, knows nothing about selling and marketing to schools. So this business is not going to be successful. But what you should do is you should advise education publishers because they have no idea about how to transform from book publishers to technology, which is going to be the wave in schools. And so she and I eventually became partners. And we were partners for 10 years until she retired. We advised originally education publishers, but then tech companies on how to design their products and how to integrate their products into schools, and then how to talk to schools and districts about buying their products.
Oh,
Her
wow. Okay.
background was the sales and marketing. My background was the systems design and instructional design, and then we kind of met at strategy. And one of the things that was really interesting is, we had a deep respect for each other, but we were very, very different people. And when we would meet in front of a client, we would each, within an hour, we each absolutely knew what that client should do, and they were exact opposite things. And so then we would fight, and also in the first meeting we would say to the client, we're going to be coming at this from very different standpoints, and you're going to hear us arguing a lot, but what's going to come out is something that's better than either one of us could have come up with alone. And so that's, we worked that way really for 10 years. And, I learned some of the things that the way she thought a little bit, she learned a little bit about the way I thought a little bit, but still, throughout that time, we would hash out these ideas with the client and then come up with some very interesting strategies. And then through that work, I built a reputation, and I especially built a reputation in game-based learning. So I would talk to a lot of people who were, let's say, game developers, or I talked to publishers who wanted to gamify their programs, or I talked to teachers who had started using games within their classes and they
Hmm.
wanted to expand it. And I ended up speaking about once a year at a combination program of University of Pennsylvania and Wharton, which is combined around education technology and business. And I would speak to them about what the education market. And then through that, I got an email from a university in Niger, and not
Wow.
Nigeria, but Niger, saying that they wanted ed tech entrepreneurs from the US to talk to their undergraduates.
Wow.
And I was thinking, I don't know why an ed tech entrepreneur in the US is going to help an undergraduate in a completely different country with a
Yeah.
completely different education system, which is really, actually, I didn't know it at the time, but it's basically one of the two or three poorest countries in the world.
Mm.
And at the same time, it was like I was having this issue about, so this is 2016, 2017, this issue about, as a world, we're not solving all these problems that we face. We're just so busy fighting with each other.
Yeah.
And we could be working on solutions, and we're just looking at the problems wrong, because we're thinking, there's a right answer, and I got the right answer, or this person has the right answer, and so everybody else is wrong, and we don't know how to reach out and connect to people. And the education system is like, I've been in education for 12 years, and I don't see us getting any better. So I had all these things going on in my mind. So I wrote an email back to them and said, I don't think that an ed tech executive is going to really help your undergraduates, but I've been studying how successful people make sense of situations and how they stay in a successful mode, even if things don't go right. And I could do a class on sense making for these people. Now,
Oh.
just,
Yeah.
I don't know why that kind of popped into my mind, but it was one of those things that, just, okay, let me just send this email out. So I
Yeah.
sent the email out. We ended up talking, and in June 2017, they first started. Well, why don't you come out here for a semester? And it's like, I'm not going to go to another country for
Where?
a full semester. But we agreed that I would go and I would teach a 2 day workshop twice to
Hmm.
their. I would go out there. There'd be 60 to 70 kids in each one. Kids being 18 to 25-year-olds. And so we agreed that in, let's say, June, July of 2017, that I would go out in February. And then I'm like, Mitch, you're an idiot. You don't know how to do this.
Mm.
Well, like, how are you going to teach a 2 day course to undergraduates on how people make sense? You've read a lot of books, you've taken a lot of courses, but you never taught this to anybody. So in that time, I read 11 books and
Oh.
watched a lot of videos and read a lot of articles. But it was books not just on what, sense making, but it was, if you think about it, economics is a way we make decisions, right? Cognitive behavior, pedagogy, coaching, organizational development, military strategy. These are all about different aspects about how we make decisions and how different people are successful. And each one seemed to have a slice on what people did, but nobody seemed to have put it together. So what I tried to do is pull all these different disciplines together to come up with a 2 day class. And then in February, I flew out to Niger and taught for 2 days to these undergraduates. And at the end of the 2 days, I'm like, and that's sense making. And they
Mm.
stood up and cheered.
Wow.
And it was like, okay, so we don't teach these things in school,
Yeah.
but we have these stories that we tell ourselves, and we think that because we have the story that's in our head that it's true.
Right.
So one story could be, I don't know how to do this. Another story is, this person could be wrong. Another story is, this is the right thing to do. So we have all these stories, and nobody ever explained never is to anybody, that you can change these stories.
Right.
And just because you think a story is true, maybe you're 90% right, but that means you're 10% wrong, and you could learn from somebody else. And so they got it. And this is 2018 now. I'm still friendly with about 6 or 7 of those kids who were in the
Yeah.
two courses.
That's amazing.
And it was really cool. So then it was like, well, okay, I'm still advising these education technology companies, but this seems to be something that can really make a difference. And then over the intervening 7 years, I've really gravitated. So I'm not advising companies anymore. But what I'm doing is, I have this mission. Like, there's 8 million people on the planet, right? 8 billion people. What if 5 million people really understood how their brains work
Mm.
and how to stay in resilient, resourceful mode, even when things go wrong, even when people disagree with us, so that they could collaborate and connect with each other. Wouldn't they be happier? Wouldn't they be more successful? And wouldn't we start really working towards solving all these issues that we face as a country, as a community, as a planet? And so that, my mission now is, how do I get these techniques, or how does a team of people get these techniques into the heads of more people so that people could live happier and more successful lives?
Wow.
And that's where I am.
Wow, that's cool. That's a huge why. That's a great why you're doing what you're doing, to create 5 million people to be in resilient, resourceful mode. And one thing that was really interesting about your story was when you were working with your partner, that both you and she attack a problem from a different perspective, and you can agree to disagree, but that you both realize that each of you has unique strengths from a different perspective, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
you can come together, have a conversation, and then formulate a plan for a client based on both of your unique
Mm-hmm.
perspectives. And I have to wonder that out of that, you just naturally evolved into this idea where people can come together and work together in this resilient, resourceful mode. So I think that's really, really, really cool. And that, yeah, let's get into and talk about first. What I'd like to do is talk about mindset. So there's two words in the book I want to bounce off of for our podcast. It's mindset and mind shifting. And mindset is one of those words, we hear it, and it's almost like the word trauma. You hear trauma, and it's like you can ask 10 different people, you'll get 10 different definitions of what trauma is. The same thing about mindset. You can ask 10 different people, get 10 different answers. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to define mindset the way you define it. And I have the definition of your book right in front of me. So I'll just
Okay.
go ahead and read that.
Yeah. Because I'll say something a little bit different that'll,
Yeah,
so
but the premise will still be the same. And succinctly, mindset, here's from the book quote, a mindset refers to the attitudes, beliefs, and ways of thinking that determine a person's behavior, outlook, and mental attitude toward a situation. So there's
yeah.
mindset. I love it. It's just, yeah, that's our attitudes, beliefs, and ways of thinking that determine our behavior, outlook, and mental attitude towards a situation. And I
Mm-hmm.
heard you talk about the stories we tell ourselves
Yeah.
as well. And I've
Mm-hmm.
done a lot of story work. I've done a lot of healing through story
Right.
work.
And
I
yes,
have
I've heard that.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have my book, Small Step. My book is called Small Steps, Big Wins. A lot of it does talk. I do have one chapter in there about story work and how that has helped me transform my perspective on situations that have happened to me. So when you talk about the stories that we tell ourselves, and I'm sure you've come across this in the research, the brain doesn't know the difference between fact or fiction.
No. Or it doesn't know the difference between past or future or present.
Right.
Well, present is what you're experiencing, but it doesn't, when you imagine something in the future, it goes through the same process as if you were remembering something in the past.
Yeah, yeah. And how we can shift the perspective of a situation that has happened. And
Mm-hmm.
there's also that ability to look at just the facts of the situation, but there's also a way we can remove ourselves from that situation, take a bird's eye view of that, and pull ourselves back. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely it's a mental exercise that you have to be it's more
Right.
a cognitive awareness of what's going on. So talk about mindset. Yeah, talk about mindset, and connect mindset to the process called mind shifting. So I
Mm-hmm.
would like you to, talk about mind shifting and how we can use that to improve our lives.
So I think I'd like to go back a little bit about the brain. And so the brain, it's got, 100, 150 different parts. It's got 100 million cells, neurons that are in the brain. And so it just helps to have this really simplistic view of how the brain works. And if you think about the, say, two major parts of the brain, there's a part of the brain that developed that the prime purpose, and it started developing in the first organisms that could move. And that part of the brain developed in order to help the organism survive threats. And we call that part of the brain the limbic brain. And so if you think about it, that part of the brain has to be able to look at something and practically instantaneously figure out, is this a threat? And if it is, how do I react? And generally, that reaction is fighting or running away or freezing. Fight, flight, or freeze. That part of the brain can't distinguish between something that's really a life threat or something that just might make us temporarily uncomfortable. Threat is a threat. It's binary. Something either is a threat or it's good. It's one or the other. And that part of the brain activates in 2 to 3 100ths of a second.
Oh, wow. Wow. Is that part of the brain often referred to as the reptilian? I've heard that as well. So I was wondering if they're synonymous.
The limbic part of the brain, the reptilian part of the brain, the survival part of the brain, the
Okay.
lower brain. It's the amygdala is part of that, which is what controls that's the part that when we feel fear, that's the amygdala firing. So that part of the brain activates, as I said, in like 2 to 3 100ths of a second. Now, when you and I are talking and when we're thinking, we're accessing another part of the brain, the higher parts of the brain that first, well, it started developing, I guess, in reptiles to a certain extent, but much more so in mammals and much more in hominids, and especially in human beings. And that part of the brain is the cortex, and the part that controls consciousness is the front part of that cortex, or it's the prefrontal cortex, PFC sometimes you call it. But that prefrontal cortex is capable of critical thinking, it's capable of innovation, it's capable of connecting with people, of empathy, self-regulation. All those things take place driven by the prefrontal cortex. But the prefrontal cortex wakes up in 2 to 3 seconds.
Okay.
So you can imagine that you have this part of the brain that assesses whether something is danger, and it's inclined to look for danger because that's what's keeping us safe. So it's looking at something that's in danger, comes up with fight, flight, or freeze, and then a half second later or a second later, the prefrontal cortex wakes up, and that reptilian part of the brain says to the prefrontal cortex, okay, I've already assessed this, you're in danger, this is what we have to do. And then the prefrontal cortex develops a story about why you're doing it, because it's already determined that's what you're going to do. And if you're not aware that that's taking place, then that story becomes your truth. That story can be, you look at something, the limbic parts of your brain say, something, you probably don't know how to do this, so that means that you might embarrass yourself. You're going to look like a fool. So you can't do this. You're not going to do it. It's bad. The prefrontal cortex wakes up. So the story is, I can't do this, and so that becomes your truth. You can't do that. Then if that gets challenged, if somebody says, for example, oh yeah, you can do that. And, look at all these people who are doing it. Of course you can do it. Then the limbic parts of the brain says, aha, you're being threatened by these people. So it releases these fear hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. Those focus you on the danger, and they limit your ability in your prefrontal cortex to only react to the danger. And so if somebody has this story and you try to challenge the story, what gets triggered in that person is, this person is attacking what I know to be true. And so that person then does not have access to their ability to critically think, to be creative, to have empathy with your point of view, to self-regulate. They're just attacking back. So those are examples of mindsets. Mind shifting involves first recognizing when you go into that you're in a situation that's being driven by your limbic reaction, and then having the techniques to be able to, first of all, calm that limbic reaction, and second of all, tap into your ability to be empathetic, to be exploratory, to have a sense of exploration, a sense of playfulness, to align to what you really, really want instead of the immediate danger. So it's first being aware, second, quieting the limbic response, and then third, being able to access your own resourcefulness and resilience.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I can see. It's interesting. You were talking about how the limbic system is like 2/100ths of a second to
Right.
react.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it takes 2 to 3 seconds for the cortex, the prefrontal cortex, to kick in to actually assess what is going on. And I was thinking about a specific example, and I'm sure others can relate to this too. So you're in a car. I'm in the car. This happened to me yesterday. I'm in the car as a passenger, and somebody's driving, and I see a car come. Our car is making a left-hand turn. I see a car coming from the right, and I go like, I guess like,
Right.
oh my God, the car is like my car is starting to go out into to make the turn, and I see this one coming up, and I pause, and that's my limit. That's a danger coming in there. And then 2 seconds, I kid you not, maybe a second or two, 2 seconds later, I look to the right, and what do I see? A stop sign at that corner. So I knew that car, once I knew that car was going to stop. So there
Hmm.
really was no threat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Like how we don't even think about that. I didn't think about how my brain was functioning in that moment until you just explained it, that we want to keep ourselves safe. It kicks in so quickly, but then we have to pause. That's where pausing is so
Exactly.
important,
Exactly.
where
Right.
you just have to pause and wait. You talk about mind shifting. So, but before we go to the process, it's first becoming aware. Two, it is engaging, like understanding that the limbic system is functioning. And then three, finding a different way to look at what is coming your way. I
Hmm.
had an interesting question. Where does the ego come in? Because I've heard it said like the ego tries to keep you safe, to keep you
Hmm.
from doing something that could be possibly threatening or different or
Hmm.
whatever. Does that fit into your paradigm, or is that just something that other people talk about? I'm just
No.
curious.
So whether you call it your ego or have you ever seen the movie Stutz?
I have
STUTZ
not
on
watched that
Netflix?
yet. I want, it's on my to watch
Okay.
list.
All right.
Yes.
I talk about it in the book in my courses. Well, but he's a psychiatrist to a lot of famous people,
Hmm.
and it's a Netflix movie.
Yeah.
And he calls that your part X. And
Oh,
then there's a person named Shirzad Shamin, who I haven't actually studied directly under Shirzad, but I've read his book, Performance Intelligence. And he's built up a whole coaching organization. For 3 years, I received coaching
mm.
in performance intelligence. And so he calls those your saboteurs.
Oh, okay.
And so those parts of the brain, they're trying to protect you. That's the positive part of it, but they protect you by preventing you from change and making you miserable. And I think one of the one of the best examples was this friend of mine. Well, this is her example, but she is a grief counselor. Okay, and you can imagine when you're a grief counselor, you're confronted with a lot of unhappy people,
Sure.
and so it takes a toll on you. So she and two other grief counselors decided that they would form a support group. And for the first year or so, that it was really helping them. But she found, a couple of years later, like it was more work. And so if you think about it, she had at that point three options. She could say, this is over. She could say, I'm just not going to say anything, but I'm going to keep at it.
Mm.
Or she could tell the people that, hey, this isn't working out. Why don't we give it a little bit more chance? Or why don't we try a few things or come up with something and work something out with them? So, let's just say that those are her only three choices that she could do. She starts off with one of them, which is, I'm going to talk to them. And her part X says, can't you make a decision already? Just like this is why you never succeed in anything. You're always postponing. You're never doing anything on
Mm.
your own. You can make this decision. You're not doing it. This is why you're stuck and nobody likes you. And because they know you can't make a decision, nobody relies on you. You're just a horrible person, and and you'll never get any better. So then it's like, well, okay, something. Maybe I should make a decision to stop this. Okay. Then her saboteurs or her part X says to her, oh yeah, that's great. Okay, you're
Yeah.
abandoning these friends. They're dependent on you. Everybody knows they can't trust you. This is why you don't have any friends. This is why nobody relies on you because you're always abandoning people when they most need you. So then she's thinking, well, you know something? Maybe I'll just stick it out. Okay. And then her part X says, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what you always do. Okay. You won't make it. You perseverate on these things that you know aren't working out, and then you get miserable. and then you snap at people and you wonder why. You're always getting angry because you refuse to take action and you just stick with the same thing over and over and over again. So no matter what she does, and this is true for all of us,
Right.
our saboteurs or our part X are always going to be there, putting us down and making us continue with whatever it is that we're doing by making us miserable. And you can't argue with them when you try saying, "Wait a minute, I don't always just abandon my friends." Oh, yes, you do. You
Yeah.
remember this. You remember you happened here. So it's always going to be able to out argue you.
Right.
You
Right.
can't push back at it. But what you can do is you can quiet it. And there's many, you can quiet it. Maybe there are certain things that you can say. Sometimes just realizing that it's there, you can kind of like, this is just my
But I was
saboteur
just ready
speaking.
to say, I mean, just the sheer fact that you're having the dialogue in your head and that this dialogue you can either choose to continue to deeply engage it, which isn't helpful, or what you can do is you can try and quiet it. I appreciate you saying that you can't eradicate it, but
Mm-hmm.
now there's a way to deal with it. So let's go into some small steps. So all of us have this narrative going on in our minds of situations that are in front of us, and our saboteurs come out of the woodwork and they want to keep us safe. So let's go into what can we do to quiet the saboteur.
Will you bring up one way of doing this in your book and in your podcast? Because you talk about breath work.
Oh yeah. I'm a
Okay.
big proponent of breath work. Yes.
So why don't you describe that first as a way of how does that work?
So breath work for me, what I have studied and learned, I did a 10-month long coaching program last year with Heroic, and Brian Johnson is the founder of Heroic, who has studied under Phil Stutz. So I'm very familiar with Phil Stutz. I actually have a quote of Phil's on my wall in front
Mm,
of me here while we're doing this interview. And the premise of the Heroic coaching program is to really focus and dial in on eating, sleeping, moving. And part of eating, sleeping, movement, part of movement is breath work. Part of like the whole thing is calming down, like realizing that you have power within you. If you are having stressful situations, breath work for me is breathing in 5 counts, breathing out 6, only in through the nose, deep belly breath, nothing through the mouth. So research has found that when you're breathing through the mouth, your body is actually not designed to breathe through the mouth. It is not processing the oxygen
mm,
correctly, and it's the CO2 is not getting into the bloodstream the way it should when you're breathing through your mouth. Even in exercise, he went the Brian Johnson was talking about this. He went back so much into like the Stoics, and they used to train themselves. They used to run with water in their mouth,
mm.
and they would run, and the task was to get to the end of the 1 mile, 2 mile, 10 miles, however long it was, and spit out the water in the end to prove that you were breathing through your nose the entire time. So,
Gotcha.
so the ancients knew the importance of breath work and breathing through the nose and not through the mouth. And
Mm,
somewhere along the line, you know, I don't know what has happened. I don't know that. But when we get upset, when we get stressed, we tend to go, we're breathing
yep.
through our mouth. And then what that does is it takes the body into the fight or flight mode. So what breath work does when you're doing that deep belly breath, it takes that fight or flight mode and it neutralizes it. So that's the importance of breath work is when you are in a stressful situation, you train yourself to breathe in deeply, breathe out through your nose. So breath work is just for me calming, very calming. I'll lay
Hmm.
there at night, and if I can't fall asleep, I'll count breaths. And Wim Hof is also another guy who's done
Hmm.
a lot of studies. He's fascinating to listen to on his research behind breath work and how he discovered it through his personal experiences. Yeah, sorry, that was a long answer to your question.
But it
Breath
was
work
so
is
informative.
yeah,
You know,
thank you. You're welcome. Breath
thank you.
work is just, I tell everybody that I talk to that aren't familiar with coaching, they're not familiar with the voices in their head, they're not familiar with dealing with stressful situations. My first suggestion is just control your breathing.
Hmm.
Control your breathing, get control of your breath, and then you can control your mind.
In the in the book and in the courses, and coming from Stutz and also Shizat Shamin. So I call breathwork as a part of the self commander. That's part of what you do in order to quiet that limbic response. Sometimes just realizing that you're in a limbic response help you, that could calm it. Like if I'm getting upset something. So there's, I guess, with my son when he was, I guess, 3 years old. At one point he says, Daddy, I can get you red hot angry anytime I want to.
Oh, the
And I'm like,
perceptiveness of a 3-year-old.
really?
Amazing.
So, I guess a little bit later, we were playing the card game War, which is simple, right? The higher card wins. And he played before, so I put a 10 down and he puts a 9 down and he takes the cards. It's like, no, 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 10 beats 9. Okay, then I put an 8 down and he put a 10 down, and he pushed the cards to me. No, 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 10 beats 8. And during that process, I was starting to get really angry every time I say something, he's not responding. What's going on? And then it's just like he's trying to get me white hot angry. So I just looked at them and so, Herbie, are you trying to get me white hot angry? Mm-hmm. And like all the anger just dissipated. So
Yeah.
sometimes just realizing that we're having a limbic reaction and kind of
Yeah.
laughing about it,
Yeah.
that's enough.
Or
Sometimes,
pausing, it's
or
that
pausing.
pause. It's pause and asking an inquisitive question. I am finding lately that when I make an assumption about why somebody is behaving a certain way, number one, it's always wrong. And number two, when you ask an inquisitive question, it's like, well, wait a minute, that person's perspective is different than mine. And the only way I'm going to find that out is if I ask a question.
Right. So, what are some of the questions that you might ask of yourself or the other person?
Oh, wow. So for example, if something came up and I don't quite understand what's going on, I would say, you know what, can you explain what you mean by can you please explain blank because I'm not quite understanding the perspective you're coming from? Or I would ask,
And you're asking that question from curiosity.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I approach everything from a curiosity perspective, which is
Hmm.
one of the top 8 virtues. There are 24 total, but like curiosity is one that should drive a lot of people, but doesn't always come naturally to people.
No, because our first reaction might be anger, it might be
Right.
anxiety. But if we can do, as you said, the pause
Yeah.
and then the curiosity and ask those questions of ourselves, or, what's another question what's a question you might ask yourself?
Well, not actually it's not a question, it's just a state of mind where I tell myself, unless I have evidence otherwise, okay, I tell myself this person is reacting to me with good intentions. Yeah,
Okay,
I
right.
just keep it that
Hmm.
whether it's a loved one, a friend, or whatever, it's like they're saying something because possibly they have my best interest in mind and I'm not seeing it from their perspective.
Yep.
I actually happened the other morning. Yeah, something happened, and I was like, I want to have this conversation now in this place. And the other person was like, well, no,
Mm.
and didn't have that. The limbic system kicked in, and then I did. I made that pause, and I'm like, wait a minute, maybe there's a reasoning why. We got in the car driving home, and they said to me, well, I didn't think the direction of the conversation and the questions you were asking me was appropriate for the place that we were in, where I thought it was. I was like,
Mm.
okay, that's why the conversation didn't take place. Just understanding that other person's
Yep.
perspective and just taking that pause. I mean, ask, and then, yeah, like I said, coming from the thought that that person has my best interest in mind.
So that's another one. That's a
Yeah.
beautiful one.
Yeah.
Another one might be, what would I really want to happen as a result of this?
Mm.
And so that then reframes you from thinking about this particular fight or fear or whatever it is that you're feeling to like thinking back, like, what's my end goal here? My end goal
Mhm.
might be I want to strengthen our relationship. My end goal might be I want to make 5 million people understand how to use their minds.
Yeah.
And then it's like, so what would be the actions that I would do in order to achieve that major goal? So we went through really the three parts of the self commander. One part being self awareness. Sometimes just being aware that you're having a limbic reaction is
Right.
enough to quiet it down. So you need the pause first, obviously, but the self-awareness and pause. The second is positive self-check, or things that you can say to yourself or things that you might be able to say to another person. That might be enough. And sometimes you need to do something, a breath work or some type of mindfulness activity in order that's long enough to be able to quiet your limbic mind so that you then can be resourceful and resilient. And those are the three things that one can do.
I was going to ask you because we talked about the self-saboteurs.
Mm-hmm.
They're easy to spot. Now that we're talking about them, they're even easier to see. It's like, oh, it's that part of me that's going to keep me safe. Okay. And then what they look like, it is quieting yourself and having that self-reflection to see what
Yeah.
happens in a situation. The self-commander, which
Mm-hmm.
is what I was going to ask you about, and then you answered that too. I kind of picture this person, this persona within me. What are some small steps other than like being aware, the pausing? What are, if somebody's like, well, I don't see this self-commander within me, where's somewhere you can start?
Well, everybody, if you're a teenager even, but an adult, there have been cases where you were frightened or you were anxious or you were somehow or other in limbic mode,
Mhm.
and you've been able to reverse that on your own. And probably it could have been because time went by. It very likely was kind of an accidental thing, like, oh, I just realized this. But if you can think about the times where you have been anxious or you have been attacking, you have been angry, and you were able to calm yourself down, you have already used the self commander. And
Oh, okay.
from the book or the courses, what's in there are maybe 40, 50 other ways of invoking the self commander, different types of ways to be mindful, different things that you can say to yourself,
Mhm.
um, different things that you could say to another person to help them. We can't take another person and put them into sage mode. Each of us has to do that for ourselves, but we can make it easier for them by asking them the questions. Well, I mean, one of the times is when we're sure that we can't do something, and if we ask ourselves the question at that point, well, yes, I can, or I guess that's not really a question, but a
Yeah,
open statement. Just
it's more of a encouragement to yourself. Well, what if I can do this?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
What would really happen is another one asking yourself the question, well, what's the worst case scenario if I fail?
So it
Does
depends
that
on how you ask that.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because you can ask that from a saboteur standpoint, or you could be asking that from a say, so like, oh, what's the worst that could happen is, and that could make you angry. Or what's the worst that could happen? And it's like, oh yeah, I could live with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so being in sage mode or resilient mode is a state of being. It's not the particular words, because the words could be said from your part X or your saboteurs, or the words could be said from a sage point of view.
Okay. I know I heard you use the word sage. Could you
Yes.
define that? Because I'm not I I've heard that
Mm-hmm.
before, but I want to make sure everybody understands where you're coming
Yep.
from when you say sage.
So I'm borrowing or stealing the term sage from Shirzad Shamin. And that's the state of mind where we're playful, we're inquisitive, we have access to our own resourcefulness. So when we're in that state of we can be empathetic to people, we can think critically, we can innovate. That's the sage mind. Whereas when we're in fight, flight, or freeze mode, or when we're merely copying what everybody else does, because that's part of the human state also, is to
Mm.
copy other people, or when we're just doing something because we've always done it that way, doing things from habit, things that we're already fluent in, those tend to be from the limbic side of the state of mind, which could be the right thing to do, but we're not necessarily thinking it through.
I've heard it said that when you're in that fight or flight mode and you're in that limbic stage and the fear sets in, that the brain cannot function in the higher thinking. You can't think rationally sometimes. You can't be creative. When the body is in
Mm-hmm.
a stressed out state, creativity is at its minimum. So first, what are your thoughts on that? And second is, what are some of your favorite self-commander techniques that help take us from that limbic state of mind to a
Mhm.
creative state of mind?
So when you first brought up the idea that we cannot tap into our higher order brain or sage brain or resourceful brain when our limbic brain is in full limbic mode. And so that's manifested in all these cognitive biases that we have that we're unable to take in new information. So if I'm really afraid of something or I'm anxious about something, then my limbic parts of the brain are secreting adrenaline and cortisol in order to raise my ability to react, which also have the effect of tamping down my prefrontal cortex. And so I'm not capable at that point of taking in new information. So when we're trying to, say, argue with somebody and they're in fight or flight mode, we can't argue with them. They're not ready to receive any facts or logic or persuasion or anything until they're also in prefrontal mode. And we're going to have a reaction because when they strike back at us, it's like, I was just trying to help. What are you doing attacking me? And
Mhm.
so we get into the fight or flight. And so we end up in this binary stage like one person is wrong, one person is right, or one side is right, and one side is right. Demagogues are great at triggering that in us. Because what a
Mm.
demagogue will do is say, this is an incredible danger. The only way you're going to be successful in this is if you follow what I say. Otherwise, this is what's going to happen to you. And so this is what you have to do. And so whenever somebody is saying that to you, or whenever somebody's saying that to me, my first reaction is, or my first reaction is to follow. But my prefrontal reaction is, okay, this person is trying to manipulate me. Why are they trying to
Oh,
manipulate me?
wow.
What are they trying to say? How come they're getting me into this fight or flight mode, binary mode? Things are never binary in real life. So that just being aware of that will calm me down and get me out of this. I have to follow them or I have to fight them.
Oh, wow. I am not familiar with the definition of a demagogue. I've heard it before,
Okay.
so I want to make sure I am understanding correctly. It would be somebody who said, "This is the way to do something, and this is the way you have it. This is the way you do it." Or how do you define a demagogue? Because I have a question off of that.
So I would define a demagogue as a person who has some authority vested in them, who is trying to manipulate a situation very often for their benefit.
Okay,
And so their tools, one of the strongest tools for doing that is to invoke the people following them into a fear-based reaction.
okay,
Because when we're afraid, we're much more willing to follow people. So if
right,
they can phrase something so that we are reacting from fear, then we're not going to be thinking anymore because our adrenaline and cortisol is shutting down our prefrontal cortex, and we'll either go along with them or we'll fight them
right. So
with
there's a
what they're saying.
fine line between somebody who comes at us with authority to, and then wants us to change our behavior out of fear versus somebody somebody who engages us. They are in authority and they do have possess knowledge to help us change. And if we follow that knowledge, it will help us change
Right.
versus a manipulation. What's the fine line in between the two? So, you've got somebody who's, fear based versus not. Is my question making sense?
So is
Yeah.
the question is 100, it makes 100% sense. Like, how do you know when a person is manipulating you with fear?
There you go.
And how do you know when you really should be afraid? And I don't think that you can know that without first calming yourself down and looking at the situation. So if you're in your house and it's on fire, you're in danger. Okay. And when you're in danger, you don't have time to sit down and think, well, gee, you know something? I wonder if I change the electrical system that's going to prevent a fire next time. And maybe I should be buying different furniture, or maybe I should be using different paint, or, you don't have time. You have to get out of the house. You have to get anybody else in the house out of the house, pets, people, whatever, and you have to get to safety first. So if you can calm yourself down and say, well, wait a minute, and is this really a binary dangerous situation or
Or
not? And
not.
if a person is continually stoking these fears, then chances are they're trying to manipulate you.
Mm. I've heard it said that fear is the other side of excitement. Or both of them, where fear and excitement actually produce the same chemicals within the body.
Hmm.
Have you come across that in your research? Yeah.
So,
How
so
do
I,
we how do we
mhm.
flip the fear to excitement?
So
I mean, and
right.
I'm not talking about bear fear or fire fear. That's not the fear I'm
Yeah,
talking about. I'm
yeah,
talking about, should I go take this job in another state? I did that, by the way.
right. You moved to,
I moved
yes.
from South Carolina to Iowa to go out on a limb and take a job somewhere else. So yeah, that was a big, I turned the
Yeah.
fear into excitement. But what are some small steps we can help people with to do that, to make that switch?
So there's two terms that people use, I guess psychologists use when they talk about stress. And one is distress and the other is eustress. Eustress is EUSTRESS. So distress is stress that kind of demotivates us, may paralyze us. And eustress is the type of stress that gets us excited and motivated to do something helpful. And I would say that for a wide variety of things, whether you take something as distress or whether you take something as eustress, is the way you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at something and you start getting this feeling like, I don't know if I can do this, okay, then it's like, well, you know something? Every time I've tried to do something new, I have this feeling about whether or not I can do it or not. So if I'm and yet those things that I've actually done that have been new, those are some of the things that I'm proudest of. So maybe this feeling is just a sign to me that I'm growing. And so if I can reframe that as
Mm.
this feeling of fear is a normal feeling that I have every time I grow, and won't I feel great after I've succeeded? Then I've just switched that distress into eustress.
Stress. Okay. Yeah. How you're speaking about it. Yeah. We talked about story work. We talked about our words and stuff. What are your thoughts on mantras, on repeating these phrases to ourselves to help us? Like, I can think of one myself. I tell myself, obstacles make me stronger.
Yeah, yeah,
Is one of
okay.
them, that when I get into stressful situations or I get into something that is more challenging, I
Hmm.
say obstacles make me stronger. And then I tell myself, good, you're in it. Keep going.
So that's you're taking something that these obstacles would normally make you annoyed, and you're using your awareness of yourself, uh, in, that you don't have to be annoyed, and that you can use these in order to grow. To come up that you've come up with a statement that now is burned into your brain, and you can pull out whenever you need to. So the limbic parts of the brain have a whole bunch of procedures and techniques stored in them that we can do without having to think a lot. And we can train that limbic part of the brain with more and more procedures that are more and more helpful. So, and a mantra is one of those things that can be very helpful. And so we don't have to think, oh, this is an obstacle, and go through that whole process of figuring out what you're going to do. You know that now that this statement that you can pull out whenever you have an obstacle is going to transform you into looking at this as a motivation. And
Mhm.
so that's now part of the strengths of your limbic system.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. And the other, another one just to throw out there for people is that every problem has a solution. I
Yes.
do attack everything from that. Every problem has a solution. But here's the challenge with that statement, is that the solution isn't always instantaneous. And I was just having a conversation with a friend this morning. I'm a trained mathematician. And
Mm-hmm.
so mathematicians, what they do is you have a problem and that you put it down on paper, and there is a set of situation, like there's a prescription to get from point A to point B and solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized, and we were having this discussion, was that sometimes if my brain doesn't solve the problem,
Mm-hmm.
I keep coming back to it.
Yep.
And that you don't, but to realize that you don't always have to have the solution right away. So it's,
So I would say there's there's a person named David Snowden, and I don't really talk about this in the book, and the book is based on the first course, which is mostly on the brain. The second course is based on how you handle different types of situations. But Dave Snowden came up with a way of thinking about situations where there's four different types of situations. One type of situation is a situation where you can look at something and pretty much know this is the right thing to do. Pretty much anybody could have come up with that. Originally he called those simple situations. Then there are complicated situations. And in complicated situations, there are solutions to them. There may be more than one solution which will work. There may be trade-offs, but most often there's more than one way that will work. Very often you need a certain amount of expertise. You may need a certain amount of information or data. You may need a certain amount of analysis. But over time, you can come up with a solution that's going to work. Building a building, if you had 6 different architects, you need the expertise of an architect in order to design the building. Different architects are going to come up with 6 different buildings, but any one of them, if they're trained architects, any one of them, the plans would build you a building that pretty much is going to meet your needs. So those are complicated, what he calls complicated situations. And then there's situations that are novel that nobody really knows what's going to happen. Now, when the coronavirus hit, that was a novel situation. Nobody really knew how it spread. Nobody knew, how lethal it was. Nobody knew why it appeared. Nobody knew whether we should isolate or not isolate. And I think one of the issues that we had with that problem is that we had these people who felt that they needed to come off as the ones who absolutely knew what was right. And so then they had to double down on the things that they said, but they didn't know either. So we had this, don't wear a mask because it doesn't make any difference. And then you have to wear a mask because if everybody wears a mask, this isn't going to spread. Right. And then we came up with a vaccination. And if you take the vaccination, you won't get COVID. And then, well, okay, so if you take the vaccination, you'll get a milder case and you won't spread it. Well, if you take the vaccination, you may get a milder case. You may spread it, but
and then you need a booster.
And then you need a booster. So if we could understand those 3 types of situations, first, that there are some things that have one right answer or an obvious answer. There are certain things that require a amount of expertise or data or analysis, and those might take some time. And which of the houses you chose is a lot less important than that your electrician, your contractor, your plumber are all following the same plan. So it's much more important in complicated situations that you pick something and everybody's on board with it than which particular thing that you pick. And then there's complex situations where nobody knows, and you have to be willing to try things, look at the results, and then adjust. And then the 4th type of situation are these urgent, chaotic situations, like your house is burning down, or there's an active shooter, or something where the number one thing has to be to get to safety. And then once you're safe and you're in some type of a status quo that can be maintained, then you can worry about, like, is there a long-term solution to this? And is this complicated or complex? But the number one thing in a flood is getting people out of the flood zone.
Right.
It's not building a new dam.
Yeah. I appreciate your unpacking those different types of scenarios that we can have for problem solving. In the realm of talking about mind shifting and people becoming their self-commander sense, and in your research, what's one thing that you thought would be hard about people transforming themselves to get into that self-commander mode? What's one thing you thought would be hard about that and wasn't? And then flip it. What did you find that you thought was going to be easier for people than turns out it really wasn't?
So what I think was going to be hard. Well, part of it is, looking at myself, it's like I'm a normal person. I'm reasonably smart, but I'm not a genius. It's like, am I going to be capable of pulling these things together and putting them in a way that people can understand? And so it turns out to be relatively straightforward. You read enough, you try phrasing it a few different ways, you find the ones that work, and then eventually you can come up with something that most people can understand and apply to themselves. One of the things that I found is that, whether you're doing this through reading my book or another book or taking a course it's kind of like you can't just learn it once and then use it. You have to go through a refinement over time. So having a coach or having a support group where you can talk about these issues and you can try different things, that I originally thought that, wow, something, I'm going to teach these people these things and then they're going to be able to go off on their own. And then I found out that, it's not even necessarily true with me. Like I had a situation a couple of weeks ago where, I'm in full flight limbic mode. I'm really angry. I can do my breath. But I just couldn't do it. I could get myself a little bit down, but so I called my son. He's no longer 3 years old. He's an adult. He's 38, I think. Herb, I'm just so angry about something. I need somebody. And he says, Daddy, you wrote the book. I'm just gonna pull some of the things that you did in the book, and I'm gonna go through them with you.
You know what's beautiful about that, though? Sometimes we just need a reminder. We have all the knowledge in our head, but to surround ourselves with a few people who are patient enough with us to remind us of the things that we just forget.
Right. Yep.
And I think that's the beauty of that story, that you've got those couple of friends and they're like, that just want to see you succeed. And I appreciate you mentioning about a coach or about a support group, how those people around us help us to get out of our own way.
Right.
And
Yeah.
how that helps us or what that looks like for us is different for everybody. You just have to find your own approach. And that was the other idea that I had, that I heard threaded in what you were talking about, is that you just might have to find one or two or three different ways before you find what's going to work with you. And
Yeah.
what's really cool about your book is that your book has a number of techniques. It's not just 1, 2, 3 things. I think there's at least 50, if I heard you
Yeah.
correctly. I mean, within that 50, we can come up with a prescription, a repertoire, things to remind ourselves to help and pull out in situations to calm down our limbic system in order to engage our prefrontal cortex, in order for us to take a different perspective and evaluate stuff that's in front of us to determine whether or not, hey, I don't need to go into fight or flight mode. And quite honestly, if we all evaluate ourselves, probably 99 to 98% of what we come across is not a true flight or fight or flight situation. And
Exactly.
so remembering that everything is not a stressor, everything is not as stressful as we think it should be.
Yeah.
So,
and we just then have to take small steps.
Take the small steps. And we were talking, and we've threaded a lot of small steps through our conversation, which I appreciate. Mitch, as we're closing our time together, there are 3 questions I love to ask all of my guests. So I'll just launch into those. The first is, could you share a book or resource that has had a significant impact on you?
So there's so many.
I know.
And if you want, I have the list of books, and I can send them to you, and then you can post them if you want.
That would be awesome. We can put the link in our show notes. So what's the first one that comes to your mind, though?
So one I just finished is a book by Adam, I think it's Kahane or Kahan, Kahane, which is Collaborating with the Enemy. And so that book is all about, if you don't have to necessarily like a person, or you don't have to agree with a person, but you can still make progress with another person. And there are techniques that you can use both on yourself and with that other person so that you can move forward. And you look at Democrats and Republicans in this country, we should be able to apply some of those things.
At least have a conversation, right?
Yeah.
The second question tends to be more interesting, but I love asking it anyway. And it could be a Pandora's box, but it doesn't have to be. What's one question or topic you wish I would have asked about, and how would you have answered the question or expanded on the topic?
Well, when in your emails, our emails going back and forth, you said that the article that I wrote about self-empathy was helpful to you. A large part of mind shifting is being able, you're tapping into your sage mind, your upper level mind, your prefrontal cortex, And part of that is having empathy for other people. And also so much of that is having empathy for yourself. And being able to, if you screw something up, so you did something and the results weren't anywhere near what you wanted them to be, just being able to acknowledge that, okay, the results weren't what I wanted. And it's like, so, and then look, like, so what did I learn, or what did I give a chance to practice? What's the gift in that?
Yeah.
And to be able to take out that blame of ourselves, like, oh, geez, something, I always do stuff like that. I always mess up. It's like, that's you don't need to
self-sabotaging talk.
yeah,
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
need to you don't need to punish yourself.
I'm
Whatever
glad you brought
happened
this
happened.
up. I'm glad you
Right.
brought this up because I did want to talk about that. It was a really, really good article. I'll make sure the link to that article gets in the show notes as well because it
Mm-hmm.
was a good read. I tend to be very, very, very hard on myself. I'm sure I'm not the only one out there that is like that. And we
Yeah.
tend to, and actually recognizing that we sabotage ourselves when we have that negative self-talk. So shifting to self-empathy and just being very understanding to ourselves about
Mm-hmm.
situations.
Mm-hmm.
Another way I've reframed things is that before I go, I have been really, really hard. I spent most of my life doing that, right? But I had a mental shift not too long ago where I realized that, wait a minute, why am I hard on myself for a reaction to a situation that I've never encountered before?
Right.
And just looking at it from that perspective, I'm like, okay, if I were encountering the same situation over and over again, I keep acting the same way. Yeah, okay, then you take a step back and say, okay, why do I keep doing that? But if I found I had a lot more empathy for myself when I realized, well, wait a minute, that's a new situation. You reacted the best you could with the information that you had in front of you.
Yep. Yep.
It's just,
Isn't it?
again, it
Yep.
comes back to what's the story that we tell ourselves. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad you brought that up. As we close, what is one small step that someone can do today that's going to help them change their tomorrow?
Well, I'm going to go back to self-empathy and just understand that we're all going through life, and there's no instruction manual, and you're put on this earth to enjoy your life. And so
Mm,
asking yourself, well, what would I really love to happen? What would I really love to do? And to understand that you're a good person.
perfect. And that circles back around to the title of your book, where we get rid of we stop our brain from sabotaging our happiness and success.
Thank you.
Mitch, thank you so much for the gift of your time. How can people find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Mitch Weisburgh. They can. That's probably one of the easiest ways to find me. I write a newsletter. So the newsletter is right now, it's at blog.mindshiftingeducators. And so that they can find the articles what I try to do is I try to take things that I read in the blogs or wherever, and then apply them to mind shifting and how we can learn from them. So those are what my articles tend to be about. So they can find my blog there. And then, my name, Mitch Weisburgh, mitch.weisburgh@gmail, is how to reach me by email.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you for the gift of your time. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
I have to. You're a wonderful interviewer, and
Thank you.
And I loved your stories.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I value your time with me, and I seek to make every moment count. In order to make lasting change in your life, listening is usually not enough. So I want to ask you, what practical steps are you going to put into action today as a result of listening to this podcast? Remember, any step, any action, no matter how small, starts your journey to a big win. And if you're not sure where to get started, reach out to me and let's have a conversation. Until next time, love yourself, then love others. Peace.